This ancient shell used to flourish in the glacially carved tidal zones of our large estuarial region. These oysters thrived on our sandy shores and occasional gathering sites for Muncie Lenape in our northward watershed and their southern cousins, the Unami Lenape, gathered along these shores, eating these oysters, along with the extended family of Algonquian peoples. And over thousands of years of these shared meals, the great shell bins began to accumulate. And they formed really a heap that symbolized the shared memories of the unfolding annual gatherings of the original peoples of these lands. These oysters also gave witness to what the Afro-Caribbean British scholar Paul Gilroy, many of you know, had called the Black Atlantic. Ellen Gallagher's brilliant painting that we've used for this poster reveals a figure with a man with a peg leg, an eye patch, seaweed, and a massive egg sac hair halo. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome each and every one of you to the annual Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series. Sorry we started a little late, but we had some technical issues that we fixed. This year, we're celebrating the thematic Black Futures, What Seems to Be Need Not Be. This year, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. Now, I know some of you in this room who are my students have not even turned 20 yet, but I'm wondering, how many of you have been here for about 10 years, coming for about 10 years? Okay, wow, okay, and how many of you have been coming for 20 years? Ooh, okay, and 30 years? 30 years, okay. Amazing, 40 years, okay. Okay, I think those who have been here for 40 years will get you 4 free lattes in the back over there, okay, so yeah. This indeed is a reunion, not just the 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th reunions that we have in high schools, but in fact, 40 years of this esteemed civic ritual of coming together annually. What feels like the coldest day of many years, right? We're coming back in some ways like migrating birds, back to this special place to talk, listen, and get to know each other again. My name is Jack Chen, director of the Clement A. Price Institute here at Rutgers University. It is my honor and privilege to be in the position once occupied by Clement A. Price. I want to take this moment to acknowledge his wonderful, beloved sister, Jamila Price. Jamila, would you mind standing up? She just came from Pasadena where, what is it, 80 degrees? Okay, well, not 80, okay. And to also recognize Mary Sue Sweeney Price, his wonderful, beloved partner of many decades. Mary Sue. Before we begin, I just want to remind you to please turn off your cell phones, okay? I can see a lot of people going for that. It is my first privilege this morning to invite someone whom I have come to respect for his great knowledge, his wisdom, and his humility, as someone I consider a brother. Chief of the Turtle Clan of the Ramapo Lenape Nation, Chief Vincent Mann has agreed to give us some morning blessings. He will open our reunion. Chief Mann, could you please welcome Chief Mann?
Kiha Kolomosi, Ninjashinzi Kikai Man, Nunjiai Lamapo Sipu, Wak Lamapo Wanjikil. Anishi ki shalomokwen, elamiliang yonkwai kishkwik, wak kukana aki, wak tinda, wak umbi, wak ilongo matit, wak nimbu mausawakanam. Anishik, 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 Anishik. How are you guys? Good? My name is Chief Man. I come from the Ramapo Lenape Nation. I'm the Turtle Clan chief from the Ramapo Mountains, the Ramapo River. I said, thank you, Creator, for giving us this day. We thank you for giving us our Mother Earth and the fire and the water and the trees. We thank you for all of our relations. But most importantly, we thank you for our lives. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you to the four directions. I want to welcome everybody here, not just to the city of Newark, but also to the place of my ancestors, the Lenape, Munsee-speaking people. We are living proof of the resiliency of human beings that are aboriginal or indigenous to certain places around the world. And our connections to this land that is covered up by concrete and blocks and cement is still alive. And you know, we're not just still here, we are a part of it as much as this school, as much as all of the folks that are in this room or have memories of those who can't be here today. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me, Jack, to be able to be here today to offer up a blessing and a prayer. Mayor, it's good to see you. Again, thank you. Anishik.
Black Futures is the thematic title of this year's 40th MTW Lecture Series. Black Futures with the subtitle, What Seems to Be Need Not Be. That subtitle is from the visionary jazz composer, poet, performer Sun Ra. Somebody else's idea of things to come need not be the only way to vision the future. What seems to be need not be to build a world on. First, what seems to be need not be is a form of reconnecting with the way the deep past continues to live in this present moment. The present doesn't exist alone, but always in relationship to this present past. As we begin to learn how to reconnect with the land and the deep history of our estuarial region, our watershed, we necessarily have to remember, reconnect, re-put that back together what is so critically important for us to tell stories, different stories, that remember the oysters, for example, that also remember the corn, the squash, and beans, the three sisters, and potatoes, and peppers. And what would I and many of the world's cultures do without spicy hot peppers? The foods that we take for granted to this day, of course, were cultivated over thousands of years ago and traveled thousands of miles, right? Thousands of miles to this shoreline by the original peoples of the Americas, well before the Dutch and the British claimed these lands as their private property. Indeed, dispossession and enslavement were conjoined twins. I wanted to share these slides as a form of land acknowledgement. It's now being done more often, but it's oftentimes done without a deep understanding of what we're talking about. This is before 1609 when Henry Hudson came and arrived, and the river that we now know, of course, was named after him, but there were people for thousands of years before Henry Hudson arrived. and you begin to see the names that we're so familiar with today as really being linked to the Algonquian language that the Lenape people had used to describe places in the landscape that would be usable, and signals as a way to let people know what you could find in those places. This is the early moment, roughly 1680, of dispossession beginning to happen, of disease and violence pushing away the Lenape peoples in the region that we know so well. And this is a slide of the enslavement that began to take place in the very large plantations that began to supplant, right, the Lenape peoples. For example, the Elizabeth patent was 500,000 acres that was transferred and stolen, basically. So we see enslavement, as it's called a plantation, immediately after the land was taken, taking hold of the region and profoundly changing what had been in a way that is something that I think all of us really can agree has really been a historic, grave injustice to the region. That black sailor of the Black Atlantic had a life and daily reality intimately related to the Lenape families that pioneered fertilizing techniques and built the fish weirs. And those fish weirs, some of which are still in the Passaic River, are the oldest surviving structures made by humans in this region. And the stories of all subsequent migrants, my family included, are built on the wealth and power of the trading of pelts, adapting survival techniques, the taking of lands to form giant 500,000 acre plantations, and having enslaved peoples work without choice. So when we look at any one location in our region, this is the Passaic region, many of you recognize. In fact, Fran Bartowski was just telling us of this story about her father working in the Botany Worsted Mills. This island, which is just, many of you know this area where there's Dundee Island right there, of course, is the layering of immigrants working in these factories, but also literally on top of enslaved African Americans and also on top of what is perhaps the largest burial ground of the Lenape peoples in the region. Second, what seems to be need not be is haunting the future. The future is also always about how the present past haunts what is to come, the present future. That is, unless we can shake and reimagine and break with what appears to be inevitable. When I listen to the great Nina Simone's haunting version of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, I sense the spirits and stories of the ways that should not have been. This is not about wasting time dwelling on the past. It's about an affirmation of a different life that we have to build still. All of you who listen to WBGO and who know Nina Simone and know Billie Holiday know the lyrics. Southern trees bearing strange fruit, blood on the trees and blood at the roots, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. When I learned this classic anti-racist protest song was written by the Jewish New York City school teacher Abel Meeropol under the WASP pseudonym Lewis Allen, I realized this story is not so different from the histories we have grappled with in Manhattan's Chinatown, where I have done my work up until this point. From the founding factions of European colonialism, our stories are intertwined and intermingled, yet we ourselves too often, too easily disavow those interconnections. This is the genius of Black Futures and what's captured in Sun Ra's lyrics. Somebody else's idea of things to come need not be the only way to vision the future. What seems to be need not be to build a world on. Some quick announcements. Sadia Hartman, unfortunately, is not able to attend today, so she will not be able to share her brilliant insights with us. But nonetheless, part of the genius of MTW is that we have a bountiful group of speakers. So we have 3 fantastic speakers that you are going to be treated to. And it's also part of the genius of MTW to begin with the Negro National Anthem. And today we welcome the return of A. Lorraine Davis to perform and to sing, and Sterling Overshorn, the pianist, to perform the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and they're also going to be performing Spiritual Ride. Thank you.
Lift every voice and
Aylor Nee Davis, and Sterling Overshown. Thank you so much. Thank you. Rarely in life do stars and planets align. The reason I left NYU to come to this campus is the unusual alignment of great students, great faculty, and the leadership of this campus and this city. Ras Baraka is the 40th mayor of the city of Newark, a native of Newark whose family has lived in the city for more than 70 years. Mayor Baraka's progressive approach to governing has won him accolades from grassroots organizations to the White House. With a forward-thinking agenda that reduced crime to the lowest levels in 5 decades, addressed affordability while managing steady growth, lowered unemployment, and returned local control of schools after more than 2 decades. Baraka defied expectations during his first term in office. Mayor Baraka's futurist agenda includes the implementation of a groundbreaking partnership called HIRE, Buy, Live, Newark, a program that marks the first time that any U.S. city has sought to transform its economy by combining employment, procurement, and residential strategies. These types of initiatives caught the attention of Amazon, which named Newark as a finalist city and in its search to establish its second global headquarters. Could you please all join me in welcoming Mayor Ras Baraka.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to first protest that somebody made me speak after that song singing there. I think we all should go home after that. That was amazing. I just want to thank Chancellor Cantor for the work that she's doing still in this city, to continue the things that have been going on in this community for years. And it is always a pleasure to be here. Marion Wright Thompson, Edelman, all of the things we say. The lecture series, 40 years is a long time. And to have this kind of public discourse about the identity of Black people is huge. Particularly in this time period, to still have this kind of discourse about our music, our sexuality, right? Our philosophical kind of ideas and concepts, where we are, where we want to be, is radical. It was radical in 1981, and it's still radical in 2020 to have these discussions in the middle of what we're seeing nationally in this country from the crazy person in DC. He is a little... My mother would caution me in calling him crazy because that's like giving him an excuse. He's actually not crazy, he's sane, and many of us are crazy because we continue to support him. That is, when we talk about Black future, I don't think that he's interested in making sure that there is a future for Black people, or for many people for that matter. When we started, we mentioned Sun Ra. And I had to, I was asleep when I came in here because I have a little baby. But when I heard Sun Ra, it kind of woke me up because I heard Sun Ra blaring out of the den in my house on the first floor from a radio station called WBGO that we're struggling to get the soul back of right now, right? Sun Ra wasn't just saying what seems to need to be talking about the future, he was talking about the present, right? But Sun Ra, if you saw Sun Ra, if you heard him, you definitely knew that he was in the future. He was certainly in the future. He was Octavia Butler future, right? He was in the future. When I was 15 and you listened to Sun Ra, I didn't know what was going on. That was way past Star Trek, Sun Ra. That was Star Trek with Lieutenant Uhuru as the captain of the ship. You know what I mean? So when I listen to that, you talk about the futurism of black folks, but he was really saying what was possible, that when you show the future, we have to be in it. Because we grow up and you watch these movies of the future, we not in it. It's like somebody had a deliberate premonition of the idea of black people would be disappeared by then. Sun Ra made it clear that not only are we here today, that we're gonna be here tomorrow. And this is what we may look like tomorrow, right? In that, I have to leave here and go speak to some young people. We have a leadership class. And the leadership class is designed so that the philosophy that we're talking about actually comes into fruition, that we are actually present in the future. That we have people who are actually alive and well and moving and thinking and pushing our ideas in the future. But in order for them to do that, they have to be a connection to the present and a real connection to the past. And I think all of those things have been severed. It's just, I think they've been severed. And this gives us the opportunity to string them all back together again, right? We're in this kind of mode now of the stay woke generation. We're staying woke in social media. And staying woke, to me, is just a state of consciousness, right? It doesn't mean that we're informed. It means that we are aware, right? We're woke. We can be awoke, but we also can be misinformed. We want to be awoke, but we want to be informed as well. We don't, because being awoke, is one thing, but knowing what's going on is something totally different. And so your wokeness has to be attached to something, has to be attached to a history of a people that have been struggling for a very, very, very long time, and be clear about that struggle and attach it to what's going on now and have a clear idea of what you want to see in the future, not what you just opposed to in the present, what you actually want to see tomorrow, right? What do you want to develop? What do you want to build tomorrow? And what you want to build tomorrow should be informed by your struggles in the present, but it also should be lifted up by the history of folks who got you to actually be where you are today. I am never, ever of the idea that I got here on my own. I'm not these people who quote their resume and say, I have all of these incredible things. This is why I'm here, because I know there was a time when people wouldn't even read my resume. And that there were folks that had to struggle without resumes to get me to a place where people will begin to read my resume, right? So I'm not of the illusion or the delusion that I got here on my own and that my presence by myself is going to fix everything that people 10 times more brilliant than I am have struggled with for centuries and decades, right? So the idea of our liberation didn't start in 2014 when I became the mayor, and it won't end when I leave me being the mayor. And there were brilliant people like Du Bois and Douglas and Henry Highland Garnett, folks that are 10 times more brilliant than I am, Sojourner Truth, who thought these things, who grappled with these ideas, who were more articulate, more studied, more learned than I am, who have not come to answers fully to what we're struggling with, means to me that all I have to do is grab the baton and run it as far as I can, run it until I'm out of breath, and I pass it to somebody else to carry it on. That is my definition of black future, making sure I pass the baton to some brilliant black baby who can carry what I'm doing today on 20, 30 years from now. God bless y'all.
Thank you, Mayor Baraka. That was fantastic. Shanna Harris serves as Vice President of Corporate Giving, where she oversees all cash for Prudential's Corporate Social Responsibility Program. Her responsibilities include management of staff, development of program strategy, and oversight of the distribution of over $50 million of grants and charitable contributions. Prior to joining Prudential in 2004, Harris was the director of the New Jersey Nets and Devils Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the New Jersey Nets professional basketball team and the New Jersey Devils professional hockey team. Before that, she was program director for communities and schools of Newark, where she was responsible for brokering community resources to key schools in the Newark Public Schools District. She serves as chairman of the Corporate Social Responsibility Council at the Conference Board. She's a member of the board of directors of Fort Jersey Can, a statewide education advocacy organization, and is also chairman of the Newark Trust for Education, a local education fund. Shanna has a bachelor's degree in biology from Columbia and holds a master's degree in public administration from the New York University Wagner School of Public Service. But I should say, first and foremost, she has been a longtime friend of MTW and also a longtime friend of Clement Price himself. So Shanna Harris.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for that bio. Again, my name is Shanna Harris, and I am president of the Prudential Foundation. And on behalf of Prudential, we are so pleased to be a longtime supporter of this lecture series and so happy to celebrate the 40th anniversary this year with all of you. As a Newark native, I learned early about the beauty, resilience, and grit of the city of Newark and its residents. And I grew up knowing how special a place like Newark was and is, and how it is so much more than how others have defined it. But over the last 4 decades, the Price Institute in this lecture series has contributed to Newark's authentic narrative, reminding all of us that cities are shaped by the fabric of the people, their culture, and their engagement in the civic space. Clem Price deeply believed in this, which was reflected in his stewardship of the lecture series and can be found in the founding principles in which he established the Price Institute. The belief that arts and humanities, social justice, and civic duty can serve as drivers for Newark's revitalization. Clem mentored many, including myself, on what it means to serve as a civic leader in this city. He strongly believed in the power of people and knew the best way to ensure that Newark continued to thrive was through meaningful collaboration with individuals, community organizations, and the public and private sectors. Prudential's collaboration over the years with the Price Institute and the broader Newark Rutgers community has helped us to define what it means to serve as an anchor institution in the city. And it has also helped to shape our strategy and approach to driving inclusive economic growth, which is our singular driver in terms of our commitment to the city of Newark. So, congratulations to the Price Institute in celebrating this milestone, and special thanks to Jack and Salamisha for their leadership of this institute. We look forward to our continued partnership. Thank you again.
Thank you. To show how talented Shanna is that I introduced her as the vice president. She's already the president just from the time that, so excuse me for making the mistake. Now it is my honor to introduce Nancy Cantor. This is actually my first time in introducing the Chancellor. The Chancellor of Rutgers University at Newark, a diverse urban public research university, a distinguished leader in higher education. Nancy Cantor is recognized nationally and internationally as an advocate for leveraging diversity in all its dimensions, reemphasizing the public mission of colleges and universities as engines of discovery, innovation, and social mobility, and achieving the fulsome potential of universities as anchor institutions that collaborate with partners from sectors to help their communities. I'm going to not go through the whole, because there's many other things, but let me just say, at Rutgers University in Newark, she leads and promulgates efforts to leverage the university's many strengths, particularly its exceptional diversity tradition of high-impact research, and role as an anchor institution in this city through strategic investments in 5 broad areas, so this is important to say and to emphasize. 5 areas, with broad areas: educational pathways from pre-K through college, equitable growth through urban entrepreneurship and economic development, cultivating creative expression through the arts and culture, strong and healthy and safe neighborhoods, and science in the urban environment. Please join me in welcoming our Chancellor.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Chief Mann, Shanae, Salamisha, and of course our fearless leader, Mayor Baraka, who, by the way, just had to go because he's got the next generation of leaders waiting around the table. He's showing me this picture of Newark natives sitting there waiting to be inspired by their mayor, the next generation of kids. So Mayor Baraka said this year in a tribute to his father, and I quote, "He was a serious academic, but believed in active struggle. Unity and struggle," he would say, end quote. That commitment to study and to action and to doing it together is what we all admire about the set of Newark icons whose spirits guide us. Dear Clem, Giles Wright, that's what they were about when they started Marion Thompson Wright Lecture 40 years ago today. So let's clap again for 40 years ago. Wisely and very much, I believe, in the spirit of these icons, this year's lecture looks forward, boldly, not fearfully, imaginatively, not blinded to what has come before and landed us here, but yet with a searching eye, thrusting mind, heart, and body forward for more, for change, for determination, for strength, for a more just and inclusive future, as this year's program reads. What I love about embedding this MTW anniversary year's forward thrust in the spectacular vision of Afrofuturism, sci-fi, music, technology, science, is that it forces open in Technicolor for all to see both the persistent whitewashing, closing down, covering over of the ever-resistant power of African diasporan culture, history, legacy, and simultaneously freeze it with unstoppably bold light, sound, words, another virtual reality to be actualized based precisely on the strength of the very culture and its imaginative dreams that they tried so hard to wipe out, shut down, use, and yet never recognize. The future holds that culture, those traditions, which have always persisted and accumulated strength and richness of voice, bursting forth, breaking out, taking over, as we will see and hear and witness from our remarkable speakers today. I want to note here that the freedom dreams of Afrofuturism, imaginative and virtual and inspirational as they are, somewhat ironically but purposely force in their takeover a reckoning with the fundamental hypocrisy of our founding principles. Liberty for all? Easy to say when you build a nation on the backs of slavery. Equal protection under the law? Easy to say when for the last 40 years we've had so-called colorblind policies that have anything but a colorblind intention or effect. Resegregating schools, dismantling fair housing in the service of an architecture of segregation, leveraging mass incarceration to keep people in their place. E pluribus unum? Easy to say when the expectation is assimilation to a preordained unity faith, or else go home where you came from. The hypocrisy of this past 40 years, claiming to be colorblind, to fulfill the freedom dreams of Marion Thompson Wright, but never relinquishing control or taking down the walls to opportunity, have left us with a mighty task. As Khalil Muhammad writes, no racial barrier left to break, except all of them. And so we return to Black futures. What seems to be need not be. We do so at a time when the hypocrisy couldn't be more damaging and damning, yet also at a time when the demography works in our favor for real collective change. As someone who has worked for decades in higher education on resetting the table of diversity, I can finally look at those in search of the exceptional child, since they only expect a few to rise above adversity, and say that the exception is now the rule, if not the ruler. Look around. Look around. There is Black and Latinx and Native talent everywhere, where it always was, but now in numbers that you best not ignore. As Newark Public Schools superintendent and our dear Newark native and friend Roger Leone can tell you, in Newark, that talent is bursting into a generation of change makers. And we proudly learn from them at Rutgers Newark, where our homegrown students have increased by 100% over the last 6 years to 14.5% of our student body. Yay. And as the Newark City of Learning Collaborative documents, Newark residents 25 and older with post-secondary degrees are moving up from 17% ridiculous in 2015 to almost 22% now. Okay, it's slow, but it's moving in the right direction. So too are the number of Newark residents working in our various anchor institutions, as Shanae can attest, with the mayor's collective initiative Newark 2020 reaching our hiring goal early, before the end of 2020. And the number of local businesses getting procurement contracts with those same anchors. And while numbers aren't everything by any means, I do want to argue that the bold future imagined by the artists and writers and historians and culturists of this gathering, for that to take hold, sustainable, intergenerational, critical mass in all our institutions, universities, corporations, hospitals, cultural anchors, community-based organizations, government agencies, matters. Actually, it matters a lot. Critical mass, especially when it can be outspoken and spoken out, as in the visions of Afrofuturism, will turn the hypocrisy of colorblind identity sublimation on its head. No, Ben Carson, poverty is not a state of mind. The barriers of structural racism don't just crumble naturally in the face of individual hard work. And no, Silicon Valley, technology will not free people from their bodies and identities. It will free their bodies and identities to be seen in a network mass that has to be reckoned with as who they are, not as faceless, formless, colorless individuals. I look to critical mass in collectives within and across institutions and sectors, gaining access and using the tools of our techno-driven knowledge economy, infused with long-standing cultural legacies of humanity, to upend the orthodoxies of durable inequalities hidden under pieties of e pluribus unum and therein to shake things up from what they are to what they can be. And as much as the wonders of science and technology and the imaginative brilliance of Afrofuturism in the arts and fiction often have another worldliness to them, they are also inherently and inspirationally undergirded by people engaged with each other in place and space, right here, right now, as we look to this different future. I see the future differently when I listen to the collaborative university community lessons of our publicly engaged scholars, next generation students, and frontline community partners with whom they team. Artists like Salome Shatillett looking at war monuments in Military Park as a call to peace. Lawyers like David Trout helping to craft policies to protect Newarkers from displacement as we welcome capital investments in our city. Scientists like Asaki Roof digging for soil pollutants in our neighborhoods and creating safe community farms. Education scholars like Charles Payne engaging parents as literacy tutors in 13th Avenue School. And poets like Rigoberto Gonzalez teaming with jazz artists like Stefan Harris and the NJPAC team for jazz poetry in the stacks of local Newark public libraries. All of it is teamwork. All of it is place-based, ground up, but with that otherworldly vision in mind of equitable growth. A vision that our collaborators in the Newark Community Development Network have worked on for decades. Let's give them a big round of applause. Decades. One owned by, infused with the body, soul, and identity of Newark and Newarkers. So here's to a future that truly includes and represents, not one that holds back and colors over, one that feels real and dreamy all at once. Perhaps a slightly different rendering of climate change as climate justice. Finally, as we look to the future and listen to its dreams, I want to especially thank and acknowledge two amazing colleagues, Mark Krasovich and Laura Triano, who dreamed with Clem and kept his dreams very much alive, repeatedly in MTW and beyond. They will keep at it, you better believe it, in some new roles at the Honors Living Learning Community and Honors College, respectively, but of course will intertwine their work with the Price Institute always. Thanks to you both, big screen heroes and sheroes for sure. Thank you.
The eminent pioneering historian Sterling Stuckey, who's actually the first MTW speaker, has described the MTW lecture series as the most distinguished lecture series by, for, and of African Americans in the 20th century. Why has this claim been true? What is the secret of the long life of the MTW lecture series? I can hear Clement Price's voice chime in here, the power of place and memory. Where else but Newark can we find a glorious day of public scholarship in the Paul Robeson Center on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard? In the historically important River Town, a term the African-American historian of New Jersey, Frederick Morrow, called when he wrote the book Way Up North, Down South. Mississippi, a river town, yes, but Newark, Passaic, Patterson as river towns. There's something about these soils and waters that flow strong. After all, Marion Thompson Wright was born in East Orange, and Lonnie Bunch, the brilliant organizer of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, was just upstream from here, born in Belleville. And one of my mentors, anthropologist John Langston Gwaltney, was born in Orange he lost his eyesight soon after birth and was the first blind student to attend his local Newark high school. I met him shortly after he published the classic book, Dry Longzo, A Self-Portrait of Black America. The African-derived term dry longzo came to mean just so, and the book was a series of interviews around people's kitchen tables to tell a visitor from outer space, it must have been Sun Ra, what was the culture of core black people. It seems to me this 40th year of MTW is truly about this extraordinary history of those dispossessed and enslaved of African American and Afro-diasporic descent, mainly, of course, those of forced migrations, getting to the just so core stories of Black Atlantic peoples, making a life out of the rudiments of the original peoples of this region. And like the blues, gospel, and jazz, what is Black core culture has become the core American culture itself. Drawing from the deep well springs of Dry Longzo, everyday life, the seeds of resilience and participatory democracy, first sown by the Haudenosaunee and the Lenape peoples, was harbored and nurtured despite all the obstacles of being dispossessed, of being enslaved. These seeds flourished in the people along this great historic Passaic River and the Hackensack River and the Hudson River. Here to talk about the early days of this remarkable 40 years, we have three of the original MTW Study Club members. Please come and join me on stage. Leonard Muse, Larry Green, and Mary Sue Sweeney Price. While they're coming up and getting seated, I'm just going to say a few words of introduction to each of them. Their life stories are, of course, very involved and very accomplished. Leonard Adrian Muse was an early member of the MTW Study Club and retired from public service in 2012, with his last position as a public servant being the Director of Planning and Community Development for the city of Petersburg, Virginia. Larry A. Green, who is sitting right here, was an early member of the MTW Study Club as well and is currently a professor of history at Seton Hall University. And Mary Sue Sweeney Price was an early member of the MTW Study Club. She retired in 2013 after almost 4 decades of service to the Newark Museum. So I won't go into those full biographies, but just imagine them not so much as these three distinguished people sitting in front of you, but as 20-year-olds. As 20-year-olds who have fire in their bellies and are of their times and are living that moment, and they are going to be talking about what that time was about. So, Mary Sue, please.
Jack, thank you. We appreciate this opportunity to condense 40-plus years of history into 10 minutes. And I am going to begin with Leonard, whose fraternity brothers, I hope, will forgive him for not being part of a major celebration down in Petersburg, Virginia, because he wanted to be part of this. So, Leonard, the idea behind this lecture series and the MTW Study Club that guided it began even before 1980 with a group called ESOP. In preparation for today, Leonard, I know you've been doing a considerable amount of research, fascinating information that you've shared with us. So what exactly was ESOP, and how and why did it mold a mission of scholarship and service for young African American residents of Newark?
Good afternoon to all. I'm always glad to be here. This is just a great space, great place, and Newark has a deep meaning for me and my wife, who was not here. And so that I won't forget, James Price, Clement's older brother, sends his regards and his regrets that he could not be here, and I'm so pleasantly surprised by baby sister Jamila being here today. Now, back to the question. And if I can start just with a little anecdotal stuff. Clement and Leonard were supposed to meet up at St. Augustine College in Raleigh following high school. Clement was a couple of years ahead of me. He went to St. Augustine's, but he left. So we didn't meet up. We both graduated college. Clement graduated University of Bridgeport, but Rose and Leonard got married. Met in college, got married. Rose had a job in Newark as a teaching during the midst of a serious teacher strike in 1970. 1971, we married, moved to Newark, and Clement's mother, through the good church ladies, and my mother said, "Oh, Leonard's in Newark. Tell him to call Clement." And it kind of started there. Leonard entered grad school at Rutgers, and ESOP resulted from just a group of people you'll see in the program who met at Rutgers. And Clement was at Rutgers, and we formed our little communion of like minds who were, as Jack noted, in our 20s, fired up, ready to go out and revolutionize the world. But mostly had to revolutionize ourselves and raise our families. But we met and we thought we were thinking people, and we came upon this notion of forums. And through a friend, also a Rutgers person, we got a grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, a very new council. This is in around 1975, and we put on forums, one of which took place here, and it was on labor, and Connie Woodruff was one of our speakers. So the discussion of it morphed into Clement and Barry and I, Barry Jackson, kind of continuing to talk and carry on the conversation. Some of them very serious, some of them not serious at all. But it provided a spark, we feel, for Clement to take hold of this and turn it into something a little more focused and formalized as he went on to mentor students and grow his network of scholars. And it's resulted in this lecture series, which is just as you all can attest by your presence here, just an incredible point in time every year. And I am privileged to not having made the first, because I had a job by then, a real job, and I couldn't get off work to come up here. But having experienced most of the lecture series, and I am honored to be his friend, and I continue to speak of Clement in the present tense. He's just always there. But I'm honored to be his friend, and honored to be a small part of this large group of people of serious scholarship that Clement would bring together as the study club to explore new things for the next lecture. The study club, I will say there's a point. The last study club meeting, and as I've shared with Mary Sue, was when Clement, Barry Jackson, Margie Wright, and Larry went to visit Giles at a rest home in South Jersey. Giles passed not so long after, but there's a photo that we have that memorializes that, and that would represent the last meeting, if you will, of the study club. It's a very, very a dear moment for me, but I came to know Giles through Clement. But Aesop, the notion of these serious-minded young black folk kind of gave some inspiration, we think, for Clement, who was the more serious-minded of us and had a PhD to do this kind of thing.
I think it's amazing that a group of people just getting together, got probably one of the first grants, Leonard, from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, and arguably one of the first African American organizations to be honored all the way through like that. You really were idealists. You brought the strictures of your upbringing almost impelled you to do service. And thank you for describing the feeling and the background.
I will note that a lot of the heavy lifting on that was by this brother, another young doctor, Leonard Harris, who's an important and significant philosopher, and does great work on Alain Locke. A lot of his scholarship is devoted to the study of Locke. And Leonard Harris did the heavy lifting, knew the people at the humanities, and kind of jawboned
Right.
this money for us.
And also very clear in all of the research you've been doing over the past few months in preparation for today was the incredible esteem with which you all held your forebears in the history profession. Also, we'll go into that a little bit more with you, Larry, but I'm also now thinking of the moment when Clement met Giles, and I know that has a lot to do with you, Larry, but one of the common denominators in the success of all of your friendship occurs to me was the black church, specifically the CME denomination. You mentioned the church ladies getting you together. Do you want to, either of you, talk about that commonality?
Well, the CME church, like its counterpart, the AME church, African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion, had an ideal of shared service and shared vision, service to the black community in times of need, a commitment to black education, and of course a commitment to the struggle for civil rights and black advancement. And Martin Luther King is out of that tradition. Giles and Clement are out of that tradition as well. It is a shared commitment of service to the black community and a shared vision of racial advancement. And I think that's what was so important in their sort of instant partnership, that they shared this. I would also say that we were products of the 60s. We had friends, older friends that were involved in the civil rights movement. We watched the freedom rides on television. We watched the sit-ins. We were a product of that as high school people. So we were seeing firsthand history created right before our very eyes to challenge the racist establishment and the racist status quo. And this, I think, also inspired us to dig into the roots of our past. We were concerned about the present, but as Ras Baraka was saying, we needed to understand our past, which created the present, to get to a future that we wanted to change very differently from what we were experiencing and what our ancestors were experiencing. So there was a confluence of these factors that I think motivated everyone to be on the same page and to be essentially unified in going forward.
You were all well raised.
And a little, yes, we were.
As a certain person used to say.
We were well directed with intent.
My first history teacher was my mother.
Yes.
Who pioneered black history in the city of Orange. So I had to get it in.
A little more local with what I understand about Clement and Giles. One, both out of the CME. Clement in a lot of his writings, and some of you may recall that one of the lectures had to do with, I can't remember the title, Black Women in the Church.
Yes.
And the picture on that poster showed Jamila's mother and other women of what we refer to as Old Israel. The church moved uptown a little bit later, but of Old Israel. And Old Israel was located a few blocks from Miles Memorial CME Church, of which Giles was a congregant and grew up in that church. And when Clement and Giles came upon that realization, that's kind of when their relationship and their intellectual partnership blossomed. They realized, one, they were just within blocks of one another, so to speak, growing up. But the foundation that they achieved in the CME church just kind of was just this enormous seed, and they were just best buddies out of that. Not just their intellectual concerns, but when they realized who they were, when they realized the children that they were of the CME church, it exploded.
Larry, the idea of a scholarly public lecture series isn't necessarily going to get you tenure like other things you might do. So what was it that inspired you to do this particular work?
Well, we wanted to pay homage to the African American intellectual tradition. We wanted to pay homage to those who had struggled for civil rights. And we felt that in order to go forward, we needed a sort of unified front of community and scholars committed to that vision as well. And we thought that what better way to do this than through a public lecture series. We didn't have any idea it was going to last 40 years. I was here in 1981, and after I gave a little afternoon talk, Clem was over here, and he gave me the thumbs up, and it made me feel so good because I looked up to Clem as a scholar and an activist, and so that was wonderful. So this is what led us to do that. And the selection of Sterling Stuckey to be the speaker in 1981, February 21st, 1981, God.
To be precise.
Yeah, I'm feeling ancient, actually, but, but the selection of Sterling Stuckey is because he was so influential to us young scholars coming up. We had read a classic article, which I would suggest still read, Through the Prism of Folklore. And it was about the way in which community sustained African Americans in that bleak period of slavery. Through folklore, folk tales, folk culture, had a kind of therapeutic and survival balm, right, to get us through. And Sterling Stuckey was so influential. And also John Henry Clark, who spoke. And John Henry Clark spoke to the Paul Robeson on the urban condition, and what better place than here in the Paul Robeson Center, right? So we were honoring those that had perpetuated our tradition, and it was something that we wanted to carry forward.
And it's been a gift to this community for 40 years. I have to just, I have one quick question for you both to answer, and our time has run out. I was not, Jack, an official member of the study club, but I was certainly a loyal wife. And every Sunday morning, Clement would spend the whole day re-listening to the tapes from the day before. And every year, without question, he would say, "That was the best MTW ever." Every year astounded him in just what transpired from this stage and how loyal and respectful this audience was and how much we learned together from scholars. So thinking forward, what would you recommend we all do to go another 40 years?
Certainly, one of the things I wrote to Clem that I learned from being down south with good old boys. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's certainly not broke, and it can be expanded. I will take, if I can, just a little point of personal privilege. Some ESOP members attend this lecture. If you're here, please stand up. Not here. John David.
Yes.
So it ain't broke, and ESOP still goes on.
Larry.
Yes, I certainly agree with what Leonard has said. And the theme that goes through that, you know, don't broke, don't fix. It continues. We've done good things, but it's relevance. We always wanted to be relevant to our past, relevant to our present, in order to deal with all kinds of issues and problems we're facing, and also to anticipate the future, to strategize for the future. So I think it's a question of commitment and relevance.
Thank you both. One quick last word.
Just a point. Larry, these kind of things of friendship. Larry noted where he was in February 1981. I can tell you exactly where Clement Price was on March the 3rd, 1975. Clement Price and I were driving around in this raggedy little Plymouth car that he had in Plainfield, New Jersey, awaiting the birth of my first son, his godson, at Muhlenberg Hospital, while my dutiful wife, my lovely wife, labored with the delivery of our boy. And Clement and I were sweating.
Now that's a memory you can't replace. Thank you. Thank you all for this honor. Nancy Cantor, Jack Salamisha, thank you.
And the wife is doing all the hard work.
Mary Sue, I want to respectfully disagree that that you are not a founding member of the MTW Study Club. Clearly you were, because you were there at every single moment of what was going on. I also just wanted to excuse me, acknowledge some of the other early MTW Study Clubbers. It didn't seem to be a membership organization quite, right? There are no dues or anything like that, so there's a group of people coming in, but also, excuse me, you know, perhaps certain years not being there, so it was a large group of people. But I want to acknowledge Professor Jeanette Cascone of Seton Hall University, Dr. Lee Hagan of Jersey City University, Dr. Lenworth Gunther of Essex County College, and Dr. Forrest Pritchard of Seton Hall University, and also Barry Jackson Barry Jackson, who ended up teaching at University of Binghamton State University. So forgive me if I'm missing anybody, and I am interested in talking to anybody who has early stories about the MTW Study Club, so please see me. My email is in the program. Now, it is my honor to introduce my brilliant, multitasking colleague, Salamisha Tillett, Associate Director of the Price Institute, with many other titles, which I won't go into. She is a regular contributor to opinion and culture at the New York Times, is author of Sites of Slavery, Citizenship, and Racial Democracy in Post-Civil Rights America, In Search of the Color Purple, the story of Alice Walker's masterpiece, and the forthcoming All the Rage, Mississippi Goddamn, and the World Nina Simone Made. In 2003, Salamisha and her sister Scheherazade Tillett founded A Long Walk Home, a nonprofit that uses art to empower young people to end violence against girls and women. Salamisha Tillett.
So I've been sitting next to the timekeeper, so I will be attentive and aware of what's going on. So first of all, thank you all for being here. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, our generous volunteers, our wonderful staff at the Price Institute, of course, Jack and Claudia, Jessica, Maureen, Mark, Marisa, and Laura. We've been doing this work, at least I've been doing this part for the last 2 years, and so this is my second MTW, and it really takes a village to create what you see here today. So, a note on Black futures. So when we were coming up with this year's theme for what is our 40th anniversary celebration of the annual Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series, we struggled little to find a concept that captured both the integrity of honoring our past, which, louder? Okay. captured both the integrity of honoring our past and the urgency to help us work through the dystopic impulses of our present. Everywhere we look these days, from Janelle Monáe's cinematic music in Dirty Computer to Terrence Nance's surreal TV HBO series Random Acts of Flyness, from the Brooklyn gathering of the Afro-Punk Festival to Elisa Garza's Black Futures Lab Census Project, to Shuri's maestro coordination of Wakanda's hyper-advanced home in Black Panther, which, as one Vox writer says, makes Tony Stark's lab of bombastic gadgets look like a box of dingy Legos. We, in all of this, hear, see, and feel Black citizens and Afro-diasporic creatives blurring the lines between what is and what was in order to fashion for themselves and for us what can be. Today, I suspect we will find out that our moment of Black futurism is not entirely new, but in a strange temporal way, simply another way of describing the long history of Black people having to negotiate and then renegotiate our relationship to time and history as a matter of strategy and survival. Or, to riff off of Ras Baraka, are we on to post-new, post-now? We are also telling another tale, an epic story of Black people constantly reinventing themselves in, out, and beyond time in order to be free. So in that spirit, can you time travel with me? I'd like to go back to the mid-19th century for a bit, to a beef, or rather a détente, between the foremost Black political figures of their day. On one side was Martin Delany, a journalist, a physician, author of the novel Blake, and the often credited father of Black nationalism. And on the other side was Frederick Douglass, the famed abolitionist, photographer, and the author of the most canonized of slave narratives. Without rehashing too many terms of their disagreement, let's just say it was about Harriet Beecher Stowe, that little woman that Lincoln said started the war, when she published Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852. It's important for those of you who are not as familiar with Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin that the novel ends with Uncle Tom being brutally murdered by cruel white overseers, and the novel's only remaining formerly enslaved and now free Black characters leaving the United States and ending up in Liberia. So in response to a glowing article that Douglass published in his newspaper called the Frederick Douglass Paper about visiting Stowe in order to consult with her about successfully and permanently improving and elevating the free people of the United States, the free Black people of the United States, Delany reads this glowing story from Douglass and rushes a letter to him. So on April 1st, 1853, he scolds Douglass for penning the piece in the first place. And as Delany wrote to him, "In all due respect and deference to Mrs. Stowe, I beg leave to say that she knows nothing about us, the freed colored people of the United States." Surprised, I am a bit sure, and heated, Douglass replied to Delany instantly. Delany knows nothing about Mrs. Stowe, for he certainly would not so violate his moral or common sense if he did. When Brother Delany will submit any plan for benefiting the colored people, or will candidly criticize any plan already submitted, he will be heard with pleasure. But we expect no plan from him. Delany, in another letter, this one dated a month later, pushes his argument, prodding and probing Douglass to admit that Stowe's inability to imagine free Black people living in the United States, rather than having to go to heaven or back to Africa, meant that she was a colonizationist and a supporter of that grand slaveholding scheme of the American Colonization Society to send Black people to Liberia rather than incorporate them as citizens in the United States. Douglass, in turn, implies that Delany's own vision of return and repatriation at the end of Blake was no different than Stowe's. So Douglass writes to him, "Yet we never suspected his friendliness to the colored people, nor should we feel called upon to oppose any plan he submit for the benefit of colored people on that account. We recognize friends wherever we find them." So this abolitionist feud was never about a novel or an aesthetic vision, but about how artistic imagination and the technologies of race impose real limits on the bodies and fates of millions of black people enslaved throughout the nation. In other words, they were arguing about the future of black people, a political space which was and continues to be a contested territory and dangerous terrain. And what their back and forth reminds us is that being free, to imagine being free is one thing, but to plan, strategize, and execute it as a reality, well, that was and is a far more difficult and formidable challenge. So when we came up with our dream list of speakers today, we knew that we wanted to cover the range of ways in which black freedom dreams have taken hold, historically and presently. Professor Saidiya Hartman, who is not with us today, in her book Wayward Lives, writes about the period after the grand utopian land experiments of free black people living in Seneca Village, in Manhattan, and Weeksville in Brooklyn, after Douglass and Delaney, and during the heyday of W.E. Du Bois. And she turns her eyes and her ear to black young women living in the decades between 1890 and 1935. And she calls it a revolution in a minor key unfolding in the city, and young black women were its vehicle. This upheaval or transformation of black intimate life was a consequence of economic exclusion, material deprivation, racial enclosure, and social possession. Yet it too was fueled by the vision of a future world and what it might be. Our next speaker, Professor Ruha Benjamin, hints at another more ominous way of thinking about the concept of black futurity. So she talks about, in her book, and she'll perhaps bring it up here today, the ways in which racially coded inequalities and anti-black technologies harm black and non-black people alike, and the ways in which black people already live in the future. The plight of black people, she writes, has constantly been a harbinger of wider processes, bankers using financial technologies to prey black homeowners, law enforcement using surveillance technologies to control black neighborhoods, or politicians using legislative techniques to disenfranchise black voters when they get rolled out on an even wider scale. So, if black people are the nation's ultimate canary in the coal mine, then what have black people done with their out-of-timeness? And how do they turn it into something liberatory? Or, as our next speaker, cultural worker Ytasha Womack tells us, in response to these oppressive forces, black people have always been in motion, have adopted an Afrofuturist paradigm, and travel on a spaceship dubbed freedom. In her book, she writes, call it the power of the subconscious or the predominance of soul culture gone cyberpop. But this dance through time travel that Afrofuturists live for is as much about the soul retrieval as it is about jettisoning off in the far future, the uncharted Milky Way, or the depths of the subconscious and our imagination. And lastly, Professor Jason King can wax poetic about any number of things, but when we devised our theme, I immediately thought of this random, I think he would say random, article, but wonderful article on Toni Braxton, Thermodynamics and the Magical World of Disney. And so he reads Braxton's performance of Belle in the Broadway musical Beauty and the Beast, and he brings together Benjamin's understanding of sonic and social technologies of race by way of thermodynamics, Womack's recovery of black music and pop culture, and Hartman's interest in the black women's bodies as performance. And so he writes, in her 3-minute number of Change Me, Braxton did not and could not herself produce social and political change by exposing the truth of the racism and difference, by making sure that the audience got their message as they left their seats. So she couldn't do that fully. Nonetheless, her thermodynamic performance in the context of Disney and the Broadway corporate environment illuminated the tension between transgression and containment that is fundamental to American character. This power to illuminate is the magic of black performance that corporations may exploit but cannot entirely control. At a time when multinational corporations seem to rule the world, the danger of black performance enacts the possibility of makeover, change, and even revolution. So taken together, I hope that we find that black futures are both the harbinger and the hope, political ideologies and physical spaces, the homes to which we return and the world that we have yet to realize. Or, as Jack has so eloquently quoted of Sun Ra, and I think it was worthy of repetition. What seems to be need not be. What need not had to be. For what was is only because of an adopted source of things, some chosen source as was. Need not be the only pattern to build a world on. And so I would like you to help me welcome our lovely and illustrious speakers, Ruha Benjamin, Ytasha Womack, and Jason King. And before we do that, I'd like to invite my good friend, dearest colleague, and the baddest institutional chess player in the game that I know, Executive Vice Chancellor and Associate Professor of Sociology. That's like a Jay-Z reference for all you who don't know. Talk about Beyonce, so there you go. Associate Professor of Sociology at Rutgers University, Newark, Sherry-Ann Butterfield, to the mic. While her bio is in your program, amongst her working many appearances in numerous journal articles and edited volumes, she's had many academic and administrative capacities, one of which, for today, she was a former associate director of the Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity and Culture. Thank you.
Good morning. Oh, that's so much better from up here, I have to say. I just want to thank all of you for coming. I also just want to have to do my own Clement memory. So we used to laugh about being in this building, about, as Jack said, being in Paul Robeson Campus Center on Martin Luther King Boulevard, next door to Bessie Nelms Hill building, named after the first African-American woman from Board of Governors at Rutgers. And now we're around the corner from the Frederick Douglass Field. You can't get better than this corner, right? The other part is just every MTW, wherever Mark, Maurice, and Laura are, every time I see the poster, I laugh because to get a picture was a fight every year. Who won? It was always Clement. He would say he had 2 votes, and if he got outvoted with the 2 votes, he had 3. He always won because we loved him, and it was his show to run. But really thinking about the work, the love, the heart that goes into this every year. And for you 40-year-olds who've been coming 40 years, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Salamisha. I'm going with that from now on. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce sociologist Ruha Benjamin from Princeton University. I'm excited about Dr. Benjamin, not just because she's a fellow sociologist, though that doesn't hurt, but in short, her work is simply amazing. Dr. Benjamin is an associate professor of African American Studies and founder of the Just Data Lab. As Talmisha has already told us, her work investigates the social dimensions of science, medicine, and technology with a focus on the relationship between innovation and equity, health and justice, knowledge and power. Professor Benjamin is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the Princeton University Arthur Scribner Bicentennial Preceptorship, the American Council of Learned Society Sabbatical Fellowship, the Graduate Fellowship for the National Science Foundation, and the President's Award for Distinguished Teaching at Princeton. Bad researcher, bad teacher, bad scholar. Trifecta. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. So Dr. Benjamin is the author of several publications: People, Science, Bodies and Rights on the Stem Cell Frontier in 2013, and Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code in 2019, among other publications. I'm telling you, it's bad. Dr. Benjamin is presently working on a book manuscript, The Emperor's New Genes, on borders, belonging, and biopolitics. The title of her lecture today is The New Jim Code, Reimagining the Default Settings of Technology and Society. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Benjamin to the podium.
All right, good morning. Are we at afternoon yet? It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is an honor to be part of this amazing lecture series. The co-sponsors, the organizers, everyone behind the scenes that made this possible for us to gather in this room. To get started, just join me in acknowledging once again that the traditional land on which we gather is of the Lenape. Let's also acknowledge the intertwined legacies, the devastation of transatlantic slavery and settler colonialism, which contribute to the creation and continued wealth of this university and this nation. We acknowledge the reparations owed to Black and Indigenous communities and nations and the impossibilities of return for generations past. Let us also acknowledge the ancestors in the room today, including Marion Thompson Wright, as we fight together for better futures. We're alive in an era of awakening and mobilization to preserve this planet and all the beautiful creation that is no doubt worthy of the struggle. Ashe. So to begin, I have a pop quiz for you. Are you ready? And to do this, I want to use this 30 seconds while you're trying to think of the answer and not using your Google search on your phone to stretch, however you want to stretch, because it's not natural to sit that long. So do whatever you want, 30 seconds, and try to think who is the author of this quote. You may stand. We have guided missiles and misguided men. Introduce yourself to your neighbor, stretch, and think of this author. All right, let's come back together. Let me see if I have any educated guesses. Who do you think it is? Throw out a name, yes. Oh, you were waving at someone. Okay, see? That's dangerous, dangerous. All right, on this side, anyone know who the author is? Educated guess, just throw out some names. I'll do like cold, warm, and hot. Wait, what'd you say? Kennedy, warm. King, hot, hot, hot. So Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. We forget that in addition to racism, militarism and materialism were the triple evils. And whether we're talking about guided missiles or other types of automated systems, we have a very lopsided investment in terms of building up our technological prowess and underinvesting in our moral imagination and our social consciousness when it comes to technology. And so it's important for us to start this conversation about reimagining the default settings of technology and society to acknowledge that we're building on a tradition. That people who have cared about the plight of humanity, who have cared about social justice, have always cared about the role of technology in either enabling injustice or being a tool for liberation. So this is the tradition on which we build. And we can say this holds today. We still have guided missiles and misguided men. Many people have two different narratives of the role of technology in our lives. That it's going to save us or it's going to slay us. One of these, Hollywood loves, right? Slaying, right? All of the robot movies, the Terminators, etc. That's Hollywood's MO. But Silicon Valley loves to feed us the Kool-Aid that technology is going to save us. On the surface, these seem like opposing narratives. They seem on the surface to be in conflict, but they share an underlying logic. In the social sciences, we would call it a techno-deterministic logic, meaning technology is determining what's happening, and we are just the recipients, for good or bad. But there is a third way of understanding, and I would suggest a more accurate and empowering way of understanding our relationship to technology. It's not going to slay us. It's not going to save us. We have to understand that technology doesn't grow on trees. People design it and embed in it values, assumptions, worldviews. But at the moment, only a small sliver of humanity is doing all that designing. And so we have to understand, what does it mean to become stewards of technology and understand that technology should be a product of democratic participation, not just the output of a few that we all then have to live with. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I want us to carve out, to think about, to imagine, what is this third space where we are thinking about designing and embedding in our digital and physical infrastructures our highest values. And so to do that, we have to think about voice. Whose voice do we hear? For many people, the answer, the easy answer to the issues I'm going to describe is to say, well, the tech workforce just needs to be more diverse. And That's important. And what I say next is not to undermine the quest for diversifying the tech workforce by race, nationality, gender, and all the rest. But it's to say that diversity itself is not going to save us. I give you this example. What you see here is a computer scientist, a black man, who was also developing his own app. And he was considering changing up the voice of the AI in his app because, as we know, most of our digital assistants have a white feminized voice, right? Siri and all the rest. So he was like, well, what if my AI would sound more like me? That would be cool. That would be different. But ultimately, he decided not to. In his words, there's a kind of pressure to conform to the prejudices of the world. It would be interesting to have a black guy talk, but we don't want to create friction either. First, we need to sell products. That reminds us that you can have a diverse team. You can have a diverse workforce. But if the profit value overrides other types of values, we're going to be in the same place that we are today. But you might just have a black face talking to you or a black voice talking to you. And so we need to think together, yes, diversity, but we need to push ourselves further in terms of what a liberatory imagination vis-a-vis technology has to look like going forward into the future. With that, let me recount a recent experience I had being a nosy sociologist walking by two men at Newark International Airport. When I overheard one say to the other, "I just want someone I can push around, ... I didn't stick around to see how the sentence ended, but I could imagine all types of endings. It could be in the context of looking through resumes, deciding who to hire. I just want someone to push around at work. Or in the context of dating or marriage, I just want someone I can push around in my personal life. The desire to exercise power over others is a dominant mode of power that has been given new license to assert itself, a kind of power that requires others to be subordinate. But let us remember that is not the only mode of power. There are horizontal modes of power where my empowerment doesn't require you to be subordinate. And that's the power that we have to begin to resuscitate because it's getting overshadowed by this dominant mode of power at the moment. So at the time I passed these two men, I was traveling to speak with students at Harvey Mudd College in Southern California, which is a STEM-oriented school, and my talk was going to be around issues of technology and power. And so when I overheard this conversation in the airport, I couldn't help but think of this advertisement from 1957 Mechanics Illustrated magazine. It says, "The robots are coming. And when they do, you'll command a host of push-button servants." And then it says, "In 1863, Abe Lincoln freed the slaves, but by 1965, slavery will be back. We'll all have personal slaves again. Don't be alarmed. We mean robot slaves." So much going on this one little page, isn't there? We could talk about it for an hour. But for the sake of time, there are just two things I'm going to point out to you. The first is just to take note of this date, 1957, a time when those who were pushed around in the domestic sphere, wives, domestic servants, could no longer be counted on to, as it says, dress you, comb your hair, and serve you meals in a jiffy. Hence the desire to replace free and cheap labor in the home with push-button servants. The fact is, no technology is preordained, but rather grows out of a broader context that makes some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Perhaps even more telling is this one little word: we will all have personal slaves again. That one little word tells us something about the targeted audience of this ad. Certainly not those who are the descendants of people who were enslaved the first time. The imagined user is gendered, raced, and classed without gender, race, or class ever being mentioned. Code words, in this case, encode interlocking systems of inequality as part of the design process. Precisely by ignoring social reality, tech designers will almost certainly reproduce it. True in 1957, true today. With that, let me offer 3 provocations as a kind of trailer for the talk. And this way, if you get bored, you gotta leave early, you get notifications on your phone, you know what I want you to know. So, the first point is this: racism is productive. Not in the sense of being good, but in the literal capacity of racism to produce things of value to some, even as it wreaks havoc on others. We're taught to think of racism as an aberration, a glitch, an accident, a bad apple, an isolated incident, in the backwoods and outdated, rather than as innovative, systemic, diffuse, an attached incident, the entire orchard, in the ivory tower, forward-looking, productive. In my field of sociology, we like to say race is socially constructed, but we often fail to state the corollary that racism constructs. Secondly, I'd like us to think about the way that race and technology shape one another, because more and more people are accustomed to thinking about the social and ethical impacts of technology. But that's only half of the story. Social norms, values, structures all exist prior to any given tech development. So it's not simply the impact that we're looking at, but the social inputs that make some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Which leads to a third provocation, that imagination is a contested field of action, not an ephemeral afterthought that we have the luxury to dismiss or romanticize, but a resource, a battleground, an input and output of technology and social order. In fact, we should acknowledge that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. And one of the things we have to come to grips with is how the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are just the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, and social control. Racism, among other axes of domination, helps to produce this fragmented imagination where you have misery for some, monopoly for others. This means that for those of us who want to construct a different social reality, one that's grounded in justice and joy, we can't only critique the underside. We also have to wrestle with the deep investments, the desire even that many people have for social domination. I just want someone I can push around. That's the trailer. Now, let's turn to some specifics. We're gonna start with a relatively new app called Citizen, which will send you real-time crime alerts based on a curated selection of 911 calls. It also offers a way for users to report, live stream, and comment on purported crimes via the app. And it shows you incidents as red dots on a map so you can avoid particular areas, which is a slightly less racialized version of apps called Ghetto Tracker and Sketch Factor, which use public data to help people avoid supposedly dangerous neighborhoods. Now, most of you are thinking, what could possibly go wrong in the age of barbecue Becky's calling the police on black people, cooking, walking, breathing out of place? It turns out that even a Stanford-educated environmental scientist living in the Bay Area is an ambassador of the carceral state, calling the police on a cookout at Lake Merritt. To riff off of Claudia Rankine, the most dangerous place for black people is in white people's imagination. It's worth noting, too, that the app Citizen was originally called the less chill name Vigilante. And in its rebranding, it also moved away from encouraging people to stop crime, but now simply to avoid it. As one member of the New York City Council put it, crime is now at historic lows in the city, but because residents are constantly being bombarded with push notifications of crime, they believe the city is going to hell in a handbasket. Not only is this categorically false, he said, it's distracting people from very real public safety issues like reckless driving or rising opioid use that don't show up on the app. What's most important to our discussion is that citizen and other tech fixes for social problems are not simply about technology's impact, but also about how social norms and structures, racial norms and structures, shape what tools are imagined necessary in the first place. So this dynamic is what I take up in 2 new books. The first one examines the interplay of race, automation, and machine bias as an extension of older forms of racial domination. The second is an edited volume, which explores the carceral dimensions of technology across a wide range of social arenas, from more traditional sites like policing and prisons, to less obvious contexts like the retail industry and the digital service economy. As just one example from this volume, a chapter by Madison Van Oort draws on her ethnography of worker surveillance in the retail industry, where the same companies pitching products for policing and imprisonment to the Department of Corrections are also pitching them to H&M and Forever 21 to surveil workers. And even as she shows how workers are surveilled well beyond the confines of their workplaces, to include even their online activity, Van Oort highlights how her coworkers use technology in ways that try to counter the experiences of alienated labor, what we might call duplicity at work. On this point, I'd like to push pause for just a minute and turn to science fiction as part of expanding our collective imagination. I'm going to show you a 3-minute clip from the film Sleep Dealers by Alex Rivera, which shows how global capitalism is ever ready to turn racialized populations into automata, into robots. Mexicans, in this case, not as migrant workers, but machines that work in the US without ever setting foot in this country. Okay, I'll describe it. It's okay. So what it shows is a factory where node workers, as shown here, plug into the system and put nodes in their arms, and then put in contact lenses which transport them to the other side of the border, in which they carry out all types of work, from agriculture, childcare, construction, and more. And what we see is that the tech is not only invasive, but it also allows unprecedented surveillance. So if a worker falls asleep for just a moment, the computer wakes her up, registers the lapse, and docks her pay. Amazon warehouses on steroids. Over the course of the film, we see memo crews starting to work at one such factory, which are called sleep dealers because workers often collapse of exhaustion when they're plugged into the network too long. In this way, the film reminds us how the fantasy of some is the nightmare of others, and that embodiment does not magically cease to matter with automation, but can actually become more intensified, intrusive, and violent. It's worth recalling that the etymology of the Czech word robot is drawn from the Slav robota, which means servitude, hardship. And as anthropologist Kathleen Richardson observes, robots have historically been a way to talk about dehumanization. Sleep Dealers also brings to life an idea that inspired the title of my edited volume, that technology captivates, fascinating, charming, and bewitching, while potentially subduing and subjugating people. To engage this tension, we have to pierce through the rhetoric and marketing of tech utopianism as we try to understand the duplicity of tech fixes, purported solutions that nevertheless reinforce and even deepen existing hierarchies. In terms of popular discourse, what got me interested in this tension in the first place was the proliferation of headlines and hot takes about so-called racist robots. There were a first wave of stories a few years ago that seemed to be shocked at the prospect that, in STS scholar Langdon Winter's terms, artifacts have politics. A second wave seemed less surprised. Well, of course, technology inherits its creators' biases. And now I think we've entered a phase of attempts to override or address the default settings of racist and sexist robots, for better or worse. And one of the challenges we face is how to meaningfully differentiate technologies that are used to differentiate us. Take, for example, a recent study. Racial bias in a medical algorithm favors white patients over sicker black patients, reports a study by Obermeyer and colleagues, in which the researchers were actually able to look inside the black box of algorithm design, which is typically not possible with proprietary systems. What's especially important to note is that the algorithm does not explicitly take note of race. That is to say, it is race neutral. By using cost to predict healthcare need, this digital triaging system unwittingly reproduces racial disparities because on average, black people incur fewer costs for a variety of reasons, including systemic racism. And in my review of the study by Obermeyer and colleagues, I argue that indifference to social reality on the part of tech designers and adopters can be even more harmful than malicious intent. In the case of this widely used healthcare algorithm affecting millions of people, more than double the number of black patients would have been enrolled in programs to help them stay out of the hospital if the predictions were actually based on need rather than cost. Race neutrality, it turns out, is a deadly force. This combination of coded bias and imagined objectivity is what I've termed the new Jim Code. Innovation that enables social containment while appearing fairer than discriminatory practices of a previous era. This riff off of Michelle Alexander's analysis in The New Jim Crow considers how the reproduction of racist forms of social control in successive institutional forms entails a crucial socio-technical component that not only hides the nature of domination, but allows it to penetrate every facet of our lives under the guise of progress. This formulation, as I highlight here, is directly related to a number of other cousin concepts, as I call them, by Brown, Broussard, Daniels, Eubanks, Noble, and others. And it's situated in a hybrid literature that I think of as race-critical code studies, and I would encourage further reading along these lines. This approach is not only concerned with the impacts of technology, but its production, and particularly how race and racism enter the process. Two works that illustrate this approach are Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression and Simone Brown's Dark Matters. And if I had more time, I had planned to dive a little bit into these to just give you a sense of the range of work that's happening in race-critical code studies. But for now, I'm going to continue by just unpacking this idea of the new Jim Code. There's 4 dimensions to it that fall along a kind of a spectrum. We start with engineered inequity, which names those technologies that explicitly seek to amplify social cleavages. They're what we might think of as the most obvious, less hidden dimension of the new Jim Code. You can kind of see the harm coming at you. Then we have default discrimination, which are those inventions that tend to ignore social cleavages and as such tend to reproduce the default settings of race, class, gender, and more. Here I want to highlight how indifference to social reality is a powerful force that's perhaps more dangerous than the racist boogeyman of old. Coded exposure highlights the underside of tech inclusion, how the invisibility or technological distortion of those who are racialized is connected to our hypervisibility within systems of surveillance. And then we have techno-benevolence, which names those designs that claim to address bias of various sorts, but may still manage to reproduce or deepen discrimination, in part because of the narrow way in which fairness is operationalized. For the next few minutes, I'm going to dive a little deeper into each with some examples. So when it comes to engineered inequity, there are many different types of social credit programs and different phases of prototype and implementation all around the world that exemplify this use of technology to codify hierarchies. So while the idiom of the new Jim Code draws on the history of racial domination in the US as a touchstone, our focus must necessarily reach beyond national borders to understand how social credit systems and other types of innovations are amplifying existing hierarchies. And so again, with more time, I'd like to just give you an idea of what's happening in the China context. But I think what's most alarming about it and how it links close to the new Jim Code is that it's recodifying a digital caste system. Residents of China's predominantly Muslim province are already being forced to download an app that aims to track, quote, terrorist and illegal content. The chief executive of one of the companies that pioneered the scoring system says that it will ensure that the bad people in society don't have a place to go, while good people can move freely and without obstruction. Innovation that enables containment. Indeed, it's not only the desire to move freely, but all the additional privileges that come with a higher score that make it so alluring. You get faster service, VIP access, no deposits on rentals or hotels, not to mention the admiration of friends and colleagues. But lest we're tempted to think that this is a problem, engineered inequity over there, it's an issue right here at home. Companies like Facebook, Google, Instagram already collect the type of data that's employed in China's social credit system. And I need to double check this, but I think Facebook may have already patented a scoring system, though the company hedges on whether it will ever develop it further. In fact, as this headline from a week ago says, graduates from HBCUs may be paying higher interest rates on student loans. In other words, going to a black school could negatively impact people's credit worthiness. A clear case of the new Jim Code. A similar pattern was observed for borrowers from Hispanic-serving institutions and community colleges. In short, engineered inequity is a problem in our own backyards. What sets China apart so far is that all those tracked behaviors are already being rated and folded into a, quote, citizen score that opens or shuts doors depending on one's record. Automated social credit systems make a broader principle of merit-based systems clear. Scores measure a person's ability to conform to established definitions of good behavior and valued sociality, rather than any intrinsic value. Most importantly, I think the ideological commitments of dominant groups determines what gets awarded credit in the first place. This not only implicates race ethnicity, but depending on the fault lines in any given society, we're talking about it codifying class, caste, sex, gender, religion, and disability oppression, among others. The point is that multiple axes of oppression typically converge in a single score. So turning now to default discrimination, which reinforce inequities because tech designers aren't thinking about social life or social reality. They fail to seriously attend to the context. Take, for example, carceral tools that underpin the US prison industry as a key feature of the new Jim Code. At every stage of the process, from policing, sentencing, imprisonment to parole, automated decision systems are being adopted. A recent study by investigators at ProPublica, which some of you may be familiar with, examined the risk scores used to predict whether individuals were likely to commit another offense once paroled. They found that the scores, which were assigned to thousands of people in Broward County, Florida, were remarkably unreliable in forecasting violent crime, and they uncovered significant racial disparities and inaccuracies, the outputs of the algorithm, shall we say. But what's also concerning, I think, is how the system reinforces and hides racial domination by ignoring how racism shapes the inputs. For example, the surveys given to prospective parolees to determine how likely they are to recidivate includes questions about their criminal history, education and employment history, financial history, neighborhood characteristics, among many other factors. All of these variables have been structured in one way or another by racial domination, from job market discrimination to ghettoization. The survey measures the extent to which an individual's life has been impacted by structural racism without ever asking an individual's race. Colorblind codes may on the surface appear better than a biased judge or prosecutor, but crime prediction is better understood as crime production, because those who are making these forecasts are also the ones who are in the position to make it rain. Coded exposure, in turn, names the tension between ongoing surveillance of racialized people and calls for digital recognition and inclusion, the desire many people have to literally be seen by technology, as this image shows. But inclusion into harmful systems is no public good. Rather, the act of viewing something or someone may put the object of vision at risk. What I'd like to underscore is that it's not only in the process of being out of sight, but also in the danger of being too centered that racialized groups are made vulnerable. Though not without creative resistance, as I'll come back to in just a moment. But first, I'm going to see if this video works.
Hello? Motion sensors. Motioning. Motioning. Please sense me.
One other thing. Lem mentioned that there's something weird going on with the motion sensors in the lab.
Oh, yeah. We replaced all the sensors in the building with a new state-of-the-art system that's going to save money. It works by detecting light reflected off the skin.
Well, Lem says it doesn't work at all.
Lem's wrong. It does work. Although there is a problem. It doesn't seem to see black people.
The system doesn't see black people?
I know. Weird, huh?
That's more than weird, Veronica. That's basically, well, racist.
The company's position is that it's actually the opposite of racist because it's not targeting black people, it's just ignoring them. They insist the worst people can call it is indifferent.
Nothing. We never should have let that white guy off.
Wait, black men in an elevator. Of course the white guy's gonna get off. Veronica? Oh, God, this looks way too aggressive.
No, it's okay. I think I know why you're all here. Well, most of you.
I have something prepared. Veronica, you are a terrific boss.
Thank you, Lem. I'll take it from here. Let me start by apologizing on behalf of Viridian for this inexcusable situation.
I laid into Veronica pretty good. I figured it was my only shot, so I took the gloves off.
Wow, that sounds great, Lem. Sounds like you gave the company a really strong message.
Oh, yeah. She said they're working 24/7 to make things right. Can you believe this?
I know, isn't it great? We all get our own free white guys.
You like it?
Yeah. Hey, Ty's the best. He anticipates everything I need. Plus, he picked up my dry cleaning. Oh, and he got this kink out of my neck.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
My white guy sucks.
Well, maybe you're just not using yours right.
Yeah, maybe it's on you, dude.
Shut up, Stu.
I got the worst black guy.
It turned out Lem had also been thinking about the money issue, and he put together some interesting numbers to show us. And then, we all went to speak to management in a language they could understand, within a margin of error of plus or minus 1%. And so, if the company keeps hiring white people to follow black people, to follow white people, to follow black people by
Thursday, June 27th, 2013.
Every person on Earth will be working for us. And we don't have the parking for that.
All right, so the show brilliantly depicts how a superficial corporate diversity ethos, prioritization of efficiency over equity, and the default whiteness of tech development work together to ensure that innovation literally produces containment. The fact that black employees are unable to use the elevators, doors, water fountains, or turn the lights on is treated as a minor inconvenience in service to a greater good. This is the invisibilizing side of a process that sociologist Alondra Nelson describes as a dialectic between surveillance and neglect that characterizes black life vis-a-vis science and technology. Finally, some of the most interesting developments, I think, are those we can consider techno-benevolence that aim to address bias in various ways. Take, for example, new AI techniques for vetting job applicants. A company called HireView aims to reduce unconscious bias and promote diversity in the workplace by using an AI-powered program that analyzes recorded interviews of prospective employees. It uses thousands of data points, including verbal and nonverbal cues like facial expression, posture, and vocal tone, and then it compares job seekers' scores to those of existing top-performing employees to decide who to hire and who to reject. The sheer size of many applicant pools and the amount of time and money that companies pour into recruitment is astronomical. So companies like HireVue can narrow the eligible pool at a fraction of the time and cost, and hundreds of companies worldwide have signed on, everyone from Goldman Sachs to Hilton, Unilever, Red Sox, Atlanta Public Schools, and the list goes on. Another value added, according to HireVue, is that there's a lot that a human interviewer misses that AI can keep track of to make, quote, data-driven talent decisions. After all, the problem of employment discrimination is widespread and well documented. So the logic goes, wouldn't this be even more reason to outsource decisions to AI? Well, a study by some of my colleagues in Princeton's computer science department examined whether a popular algorithm trained on human writing online exhibited the same racially biased tendencies that psychologists have documented among humans. In particular, they found that the algorithm associated white-sounding names with pleasant words and black-sounding names with unpleasant ones, which builds on a classic audit study using old-school resumes that found the same pattern of discrimination. So too with gender-coded words and names, as Amazon learned last year when its own hiring algorithm was found discriminating against women. Nevertheless, it should be clear why technical fixes that claim to bypass human biases are so desirable. If only there was a way to slay centuries of racist and sexist demons with a social justice bot. Beyond desirable, more like magical. Magical for employers, perhaps looking to streamline the grueling work of recruitment, but a curse for many job seekers. Whereas proponents describe a very human-like interaction, those on the hunt for jobs recount a very different experience. Applicants are frustrated not only by the lack of human contact, but also because they have no idea how they're being evaluated and why they're repeatedly rejected. As this headline puts it, your next interview could be with a racist robot, bringing us back to that problem space we started with. Though it's worth noting that some job seekers are already developing ways to subvert the system by trading answers to employers' tests and creating fake applications as informal audits of their own. In fact, one HR employee for a major company recommends that people slip the words Oxford or Cambridge into our resumes with invisible white text to pass the automated screening. In terms of a more collective response, a federation of European trade unions called UNI Global has developed a charter of digital rights for workers, touching on automated and AI-based decisions to be included in bargaining agreements. So now for the next few minutes as I wrap up, this is the part of the talk where we think about what seems to be need not be in terms of all of the ways that people are resisting and reimagining this new Jim Code. Another development that keeps me hopeful is that tech workers themselves have increasingly been speaking out against the most egregious forms of corporate collusion with state-sanctioned racism. For example, thousands of Google employees condemned the company's collaboration on a Pentagon program that uses AI to make drone strikes more effective. And a growing number of Microsoft employees are opposed to the company's ICE contract, saying that, quote, as the people who build the technologies that Microsoft profits from, we refuse to be complicit. And I would encourage you to check out the hashtag #TechWon'tBuildIt to get a sense of this growing movement. And as this article published by Science for the People reminds us, contrary to popular narratives, organizing among technical workers has a vibrant history, including engineers and technicians in the 60s and 70s who fought professionalism, individualism, and reformism to contribute to radical labor organizing. The current tech workers movement, which includes students across our many institutions, can draw from past organizers' experiences in learning to navigate the contradictions and complexities of organizing in tech today, which includes building solidarity across race and class. For example, when the predominantly East African Amazon workers in the company's Minnesota warehouses organized a strike on Prime Day to demand better work conditions, engineers from Seattle came out to support. In terms of civil society, initiatives like Data for Black Lives and the Detroit Community Tech Project offer an even more expansive approach. The former brings together people working across a number of agencies and organizations in a proactive approach to tech justice, especially at the policy level. And the latter develops and uses technology rooted in community needs, offering support to grassroots networks doing data justice research, including hosting what they call discotheques, which stands for Discovering Technology, which are these multimedia mobile neighborhood workshop fairs that can be adapted in other locales. And if I had a little more time, I'd tell you more about the specific initiatives being sponsored and supported by Data for Black Lives. Another very tangible abolitionist approach to the new Jim Code is the Digital Defense Playbook, which introduces a set of tools for diagnosing, dealing with, and healing the injustices of pervasive and punitive data collection and data-driven systems. The playbook contains in-depth guidelines for facilitating workshops, plus tools, tip sheets, and reflection pieces, crafted from in-depth interviews with communities in Charlotte, Detroit, and LA, with the aim of engendering power, not paranoia, when it comes to technology. What seems to be need not be. And finally, when it comes to rethinking STEM education as a ground zero for reimagining the relationship between technology and society, there are a number of initiatives underway. I'll just mention one very concrete resource that you can download since we're here at a university, called the Advancing Racial Literacy in Tech Handbook, developed by some wonderful colleagues at the Data and Society Research Institute in New York. So the aim of this intervention is threefold: to develop an intellectual understanding of how structural racism operates in algorithms, social media platforms, and technologies not yet developed; an emotional intelligence concerning how to resolve racially stressful situations within organizations; and a commitment to take action to reduce harms to communities of color. The fact is, data disenfranchisement and domination has always been met with resistance and reimagining, in which activists, scholars, and artists have sharpened abolitionist tools that employ data for liberation. This is a tradition in which, as Du Bois exclaimed, one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were being lynched, murdered, and starved. From his modernist data visualizations representing the facts of Black life, to Ida B. Wells Barnett's expert deployment of statistics in the Red Record, there's a long tradition of employing and challenging data for justice. Towards that end, the late critical race scholar Harvard professor Derek A. Bell encouraged a radical assessment of reality through creative methods and racial reversals, insisting that to see things as they really are, you must imagine them for what they might be, which is why the arts and humanities are so vital to this discussion and this movement. One of my favorite examples of what we might call a Bellian racial reversal is this parody project that begins by subverting the anti-Black logics embedded in new high-tech approaches to crime prevention. Instead of using predictive policing techniques to forecast street crime, the white-collar early warning system flips the script by creating a heat map that flags city blocks where financial crimes are likely to occur. The system not only brings the hidden but no less deadly crimes of capitalism into view, but includes an app that alerts users when they've entered high-risk areas to encourage citizen policing and awareness. Taking it one step further, the development team is working on a facial recognition program to flag individuals who are likely perpetrators. And the training set used to design the algorithm includes the profile photos of 7,000 corporate executives downloaded from LinkedIn. Not surprisingly, the average face of a criminal is white and male. To be sure, creative exercises like this are only comical when we ignore that all of its features are drawn directly from actually existing proposals and practices in the real world, including using facial images to predict criminality. By deliberately and inventively upsetting the status quo in this manner, analysts can better understand and expose the many forms of discrimination embedded in and enabled by technology. So here's my final proposition. If it is the case that inequity and injustice is woven into the very fabric of our society, then each twist, coil, and code is a chance for us to weave new patterns, practices, and politics. Its vastness will be its undoing. That is, the vastness of the problem will be its undoing once we accept that we are pattern makers. The decision is ours. Will we simply follow the patterns of social behavior and social order that we have inherited and continue to embed them in our physical and digital infrastructures? Or will we build on critical intellectual traditions that have continually developed insights and strategies grounded in justice? My hope is that we all find ways to build on this tradition. Thank you for your attention.
Ruha Benjamin, please. Give her another round. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to say something about lunch, but before I say something about lunch, wanted to just express a few words of deep appreciation for two staff people who have put in the most amount of time to make this whole event possible. I think they're running around, so they're not in the room to be acknowledged directly, but I should just say Marion Mien and also Jessica Hernandez, and also our new staff person, Claudia Sepulveda, have done an amazing job to kind of pull this together. So I hope you can kind of express your appreciation for them.